Thank you, Nina, for those kind words of introduction. Greetings to one and all, particularly Dr. Saji Kumar and Dr. Kavita Sudhir, and all Swaminis, Brahmacharis, and principals of schools and coordinators. I stand here quite blessed to have an opportunity to interact with you, and I do think that it is important as educators that we keep ourselves abreast of changes that keep happening in the sector of education. So my focus of today's talk, I think it's about 11:20 now, and I'm allowed to go up to? Okay. If you challenge me to that, I can go on for 7 hours non-stop. Because it's a passion to talk about anything related to education. Yes, I'll stop at about 1, I think, or about 12:40 or so, and keep some time for interaction. It would be a monologue, though I would have loved to have it like a flip mode, where I would have heard each one of y'all and sort of interacted with y'all. So please forgive the situation of having to listen to me for about an hour and a half on a non-stop basis. So we are looking at 3 speakers spoke on the 21st century skills, and as Nina rightly said, each one came up with a very different perspective. One in terms of telling what are the effective teaching strategies by Dr. Manoranjani. The gentleman, Dr. Saji, if I'm not too sure what I got his name as, talking about how the Indian civilization itself and India's path through history has taken us through many of the 21st century skills. And the first speaker, Dr. Sunita, having highlighted how her school and her teachers are actually implementing many of the strategies that are meant for let us say, effective leadership and so on. Learnings from all 3 of you for me, because this adds to my body of knowledge, since I largely talk on higher education. And it's only because we wrote the policy and because of my planning commission experience, for me the sector of education covers the entire school and higher education. So these are learnings for me. But my thrust is not going to be only on 21st century skills. I am going to sort of put my talk into 2 broad categories. One is in terms of understanding why learning in the 21st century has to be different from what it was in the 20th century. And second, to understand many of the changes that the National Education Policy recommended and which are now being in different stages of implementations, that is across the CBSE schools, the ICSE schools, and the state government schools. So it is more in terms of the rationale and the implementation of the recommendations, which is critical for us because, as rightly pointed out, we are here to empower students who are the major stakeholders in the education system. Now, when saying that a policy, when it is brought out, it is a policy that has come out in the sector of education, and since all of you may be with a B.Ed background, you know that the genesis of education policy making has seen 3 large education policies of 68 and 86, 86 being modified in 1992, and then this policy that came out in 2020. What is distinguishing about, and it is important for us as educators to understand, that policy is not, one policy is not trying to address any gaps in a previous policy, nor is it fair on our part as an educator to think that this policy is better than the other policy. Why? Because all policies contextualized in the time that they were brought out was appropriate for that particular period. So we cannot be arrogant to say that the policy of 86 is better than 68 or the policy of 2020 is better than 86, because while we are all here, we are beneficiaries of both the 68 and the 86 policy. You are here because of those policies. The challenge that is coming to us is that we are now going to teach a set of students under a policy which has come out in 2020 and where a scenario has completely changed. So we need to first understand what are the drivers of change that has forced us to look at knowledge, learning in the 21st century as distinguished from what it was in the 21st century, as distinguished from what it was in the 20th century. So I like the title about talking about the 21st century skills, but it is important to understand what is it that is so. Many people ask me, why are you keeping on insisting on using this word of the 21st century? That is important because there are very major changes that have happened, which is forcing us to come out of our comfort zones. So the three major drivers of change, and maybe at the cost of repetition for Kavita to listen to me a second time, is that when you talk about an education ecosystem, you are largely looking at the construct of knowledge and the construct of learning. These are the two major components that go into an education ecosystem. Now, when we look at knowledge as it existed in the 20th century, and which is where I think the bulk of us did our education, knowledge disciplines were seen as insular by nature. Insularity of a knowledge discipline, meaning that economics is insular from political science, from economics, from physics, from chemistry, and it was excluding other disciplines. So at our time, when we studied, disciplinary knowledges and disciplines existed in an insular and an exclusionary fashion, where one discipline was intrinsically seen by itself to the exclusion of other disciplines. During the turn of the century, this has changed, and the insularity of knowledge got transformed to the integrativeness of knowledge disciplines. So the integrativeness does not exclude but includes other disciplines by the realization that knowledge disciplines do not exist in hard concrete buckets, but rather there is a lot of osmosis effect, of seepage, of give and take that is happening, which results in the new notions that we talk about: multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, and so on. Now, since you all are all in a kind of an ecosystem which is very spiritual, it is easier for you to receive that. But if you are in a non-spiritual environment, you cannot understand the idea of integration, because spirituality cuts across many areas and many themes. Therefore, your mental makeup is one which is receptive to that idea. So knowledge by nature is in the 21st century, unlike what it was in the 21st, as unlike what it was in the previous century, integrative, resulting in the notion that our students must have various disciplinary exposures, because they must be aware of all disciplines to make them holistic individuals. So this, when the character of knowledge got transformed, can we afford to continue with an education where we only teach them mathematics or sciences or languages or social sciences and make them feel that mathematics exists in its intrinsic self without interacting with other disciplines, or that science exists in its intrinsic self without interacting with it, would be irrelevant. The irrelevance of insularities in knowledge disciplines and the acceptance of integration of disciplines is the first change that this policy has been cognizant and mindful about. The second is the aspect of learning, and which is what she said when she said 4 pillars of learning. Learning, we are thinking, was a unidimensional activity, and that learning was only the transmission or the dissemination of cognitive knowledge, knowledge of concepts, of theories, which is basically theoretical by nature, and which is what we as teachers are most familiar with, because what resides in me as knowledge, that I am transmitting to the learner who is the recipient of that. So, by the fact that that resides in me, I disseminate to the learners. So, the first pillar of learning is the learning to know. And all of you may have learned through this if you had done it in your B.Ed. But if you have not, the first pillar of learning is the cognitive part, which is the learning to know. The second pillar of learning in the 21st century is the learning to do. So, Manoranjani was very particular of trying and telling that I want to talk about skills, because that is what we are emphasizing today. It is not just adequate for learners to learn about things that they need to know theoretically, but also how do they do that in real life situations, in work life situations, and have experiential part of it, or the practical part of it, or the problem solving part of it, which is the learning to do. So, the second pillar is learning to do. The third pillar goes into the realization that we look at the globe as a family. When you look at Vasudhaiva Kutumbam as an idea, it is that the globe, that is the entire planet Earth, is one family. And therefore, the notion of sustainable development, which comes to the third pillar of learning, which is learning to live together and to live with others. We may be speaking different languages, we come from different ethnicities, we come from different regions, we come from different communities, we come from various other differentiations. But in all these differentiations, you must be able to have a harmonizing and a unifying factor. So, learning to live together talks in terms of global citizenship, peace education, education for sustainable development, universal human values. You talked about values. I was happy that all of you all had talked about values, personal values, social values, and so on. Universal human values transcend across differences that exist among human beings. So, learning to live together and to live with others makes out a strong case for peace education, for sustainable development. There can be no learning that happens in war-torn societies. Whenever there is a riot taking place, or whenever there is a war happening, let us talk about Gaza and Israel, or Ukraine and Russia, or not very far away in our own Manipur, in some parts wherever there is agitation and stress happening, you cannot have learning happening at all. Learning to live together and to live with others bases itself on the foundation for humanness and humanistic values, which allows for peaceful coexistence and sustainable societies. Just as human beings need to coexist, similarly, human beings need to coexist with other forms of nature. The environment, the climate, the forest, all these calls for a new set, so that the beautiful planet Earth, which we inherited from our great forefathers and which we are enjoying as a livable planet, should be enjoyed by future generations to come, where climate is not unbearable, where energy sources do not get depleted, where there is no availability of clean drinking water. You cannot have planet Earth surviving. So, you look at learning to live together and to live with others in terms of individuals as well as with other forms of nature, to talk in terms of sustainable societies and peaceful coexistence. And the last pillar of learning is learning to be. The learning to be is a realization that the 30, 40 of us who are gathered in this room, that each one of us is unique in terms of our likes and dislikes, in terms of our capabilities, in terms of our potentials, and we are not identical clones of one another. We are not robots. We are having our own likes and dislikes. We are having our own capacities and competencies. We have our own aspirations and potentials. If you are so different from one another, then how can you have an education system which is so structured? So he brought in this notion of flexibility by relating it to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. But that, in a certain sense, is not appropriate. The idea of flexibility goes beyond talking about individual approaches to talk about individualization and customization to each individual student's requirement. So, the need for moving away from structured systems to flexible systems and giving multiple pathways arises from the fact of realizing that in a class that I have, which is composing of an elephant, an alligator, a cat, and a bird, and my learning goal is to teach them how to fly. And I drill them all to teach them to fly. Smiles on your faces, because you know that other than the bird, no one else is going to fly. And here we are with an education system where we fail to recognize that a student may be good at mathematics, another may be good at science, another may be good at music, another may be good at debating, another may be good at some other talent. And we expect that all of them should do well in all of these subjects without realizing that individual capabilities are different. Learning levels are different. So the learning to be is the foundation on which this policy has based itself. The learning to be is not to the exclusion of learning to know, learning to do, and learning to live together and to live with others. So the multidimensionality of knowledge and the multidimensionality of learning must force us as teachers to forget how we were doing the business of teaching and learning, to going to new ways and new innovative ways in which we will be teaching our students, not basically in a teacher-directed manner, but in a learner-directed manner. What does the student need to have? What is the student needing to be equipped with? Because ultimately, when you look at education, which are the stakeholders? The students, teachers, and the educational institutions, be it colleges, schools or colleges or universities. These are the three stakeholders. And what is the purpose of education? That we empower our students with the right kind of knowledge, skills, and capabilities to become what? To become productive individuals, where they contribute to their individual growth, to the societal development, to the political development, to the economic development, to the national growth, and become what we call 21st century global citizens. Okay, we are qualifying that as 21st century global citizens. That's why all your 21st century skills come in. And who is the catalyst to make this possible? It is we as teachers. We are the ones who are supposed to undertake a variety of transactions, curricular transactions, by which we instill this sense of empowerment in our students, by which we make them independent, rational thinking human beings, where they look at many aspects of knowledge, of values, of skills, and so on. And all this is happening within the ecosystem of an institutional framework, which can be a school or a college or a university. So this is the broad context within which we need to understand it. So when we look at ourselves as teachers, we are educators, and we are not there like clerks in an office handling inanimate files. We are dealing with living children. We are molding them. We are changing their attitudes. We are shaping them. And mind you, a child spends as much time in the school as much as in the home. And a child, having come to a school, looks to a role model not in the mother or the father, but in the teacher. So Let us not think that we are doing a job like someone sitting in Lulu supermarket or sitting and selling a mobile phone or is doing some other profession, because we have chosen to take up a profession by which we are building the future of not only the child but also the society and also the nation and the world. So in that, if we as educators say, if I ask a question now, how many of you read the National Education Policy of 66 pages? And I find that there are few of you, then I would say that you should not be in the business of teaching. I can be as blunt as that. Let me not ask people to raise hands and make a situation of discomfort, but the policy, if it is to be read, has to be read by us as educators. It is not for the shopkeeper. It is not for the petrol vendor to read it. It is for us as educators to read it. There are documents that we must read as educators. And we cannot say that, no, my job is to teach history. I have read and learned history and I know how to teach history. No, you are an educator and you need to understand the larger understanding of education. And so you cannot say, I did my B.Ed, I studied all this there, and my work is over. You must read through documents that relate to education to have a larger world view of understanding. So while respecting your individual privacy, I am not subjecting you to the torture of asking you to raise the hands, but I can be as blunt as saying that if you have not read it even today, and even if you have read it once, please keep revisiting that document again and again, because it then empowers you to understand things. So these two drivers of change has been now added on with a third driver of change in the 21st century. The need why we are talking about 21st century skills, and the need why NEP is talking about 21st century students who will be able to meet with global challenges, comes from the advent of the disruptive technologies. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, data science, all these have completely transformed, that is what that word says, disrupted. It has disrupted the normal ways in which we work, we communicate, we travel, we bank. This was not how it was done earlier, but it is now the way we do it. So your students whom you are dealing with are all born in the 21st century. And you are all born in the 20th century. I always feel that as a generation, we are very fortunate, and we have not even realized that, because we went through every year without realizing that we are a generation which has lived through the 20th and the 21st century. And a child born after 2000, including a child born even as late as 2020, with an average lifespan of an Indian being just about 78, is unlikely to see the 22nd century. So here is a blessing that we had. I don't know how many of you realized it, that we had the benefit of living through 2 centuries and seeing maximum changes happening from the previous century to the current century. But the fact that our students are born in the 21st century throws a challenge to each one of us. They were born with the technology. They were born with the disruption. It is not a disruption for them so much as a disruption for us. So the fact is, you are a product of a 20th century where there was no AI, generative AI, ChatGPT or anything. You are not there with robotics. You may use a robotic vacuum cleaner now. That may be a different thing. But you were not there at a time when these were the changes. But you're dealing with students who are effortlessly clued on to these disruptive technologies. There is a huge gap that is now happening. And what is it relevant from education? It is relevant from education in the sense that when our teachers taught us, knowledge was insular, Learning was unidimensional in terms of only theory, and there was no internet or the computers. So it was appropriate at that time. But the student of today, passing out, your school students complete their graduation, they would be around 21, 22, 23, 24. When they come out, they are looking at a profile of jobs which is not known. We are not knowing what the job profiles look like tomorrow, because you are talking about driverless cars, you are talking about robotic surgery, you are talking about many things where machine intelligence is dominating human intelligence. And therefore, the threats of unknown jobs, job profiles changing very rapidly, and the obsolescence of knowledge and skills becoming a glaring reality, in that scenario, our children are living in what we call is a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, confused, and ambiguous. We are fortunate because we did not live in a VUCA world. We are already gainfully employed, and we may only have to update and upgrade ourselves to understanding the use of technology, but not so in the case of our students, who are facing a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, and a lot of ambiguity, because the standard two adages are, we do not know what the jobs of tomorrow look like, and that job profiles change continuously. And if you hear to people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, who keep telling that if artificial intelligence goes the way it is, in 7 years down the line, there will be no jobs left for human beings. It is in that scenario that we are equipping our students to become productive individuals. So you must understand this rationale as an educator to be able to be convinced why the national education policy talked about the imperativeness of flexibilities. It is imperative that we move away from structured systems to flexible systems. Because if you are continuing with structured systems, you can be quite sure that you are looking at students who will not be capable of becoming productive individuals. And all this in two small other rationale that I want to tell. India is blessed with having the world's largest population and the largest youth population, with an average age of just about 27 years, which is a window of opportunity which we are saying is there up to 2037. Japan, Korea, China, UK, US, and the bulk of the European countries are actually seeing an aging population. And the workforce and the human capital which will come to all these nations in the world is going to come from India. So the youth population, which we are normally referring to as the demographic dividend, it can become a dividend only if the youth are gainfully employed, only if they are productive individuals. If they are not, then they become the lumpen in the society who can be mobilized for rioting and many other anti-social activities, by which it will become a demographic disaster. So the more important need for India, which has this advantage to embrace reforms, arises from this context. And globally, as a nation, we have committed ourselves to the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of you know the Sustainable Development Goal for education, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education with lifelong learning opportunities for all. It reads as a very simple statement, but a very loaded statement. It includes quality, it includes equity, it includes inclusion, It includes lifelong learning. And when you say you carry along everyone for all, it is a very major task to be achieved. And we therefore are looking at, see, when the SDG goals have been created with the 2030 target, 17 SDG goals that are there, which relate to poverty, which relates to hunger, which relates to skilling, which relates to urban planning, transportation, environment, and so on. SDG goal 4 is treated as the mother goal, which will impact all other goals. This was a decision that was taken sometime in 2017 or 18, where they said that you cannot look at SDG 4 to the exclusion of other SDGs, but it needs to be seen as the mother goal, which will impact how much to. Therefore, if you are talking about no poverty, that can come only if there is education. If you are looking at good urban planning, it comes only if you have good civil engineers and so on. If you are looking at effective transportation, it can come in only with that. So the SDG goal 4 stands at the center. It is the fulcrum, and all other goals stand around it to be seen in a collaborative manner to achieve goals that are related to other sectors, be it climate, be it environment, be it water, be it energy, and so on. So it is important, therefore, when you look at SDG 4 as the mother goal, to look at all aspects when we look at education. That is where again the multidisciplinarity is coming in. That is, education is the driver of all other developmental changes that are happening within the society and the economy. Now, having said this, let me now come to the recommendations of NEP. And I think all of you as principals and coordinators of CBC affiliated schools are already in the process of trying to implement the National Education Policy recommendations. At the cost of maybe repeating, maybe you've heard it in other sessions, I am just going to walk you through or take you through the important changes in school education. Though as I know, as a policy, and I think all of you know, that the policy did not confine itself only to school education. It looked at the entire spectrum of education, right from early childhood care education, going on to school education 4 stages, higher education, which includes technical and professional education, agricultural education, legal education, looked at teacher education, vocational education, open and distance learning, cross-cutting themes of language in education, research and innovation, looked at governance and regulation, and so on. So it's a very broad spectrum. And the exercise, let me not relive through that experience, but 5.5 long years of consultations, seeing 3 committees, and having seen 3 union ministers of education, and a humongous exercise across all the panchayats, blocks, districts, state level and national level, and thematic consultations, expert consultations, online consultations, and so on, and a humongous number of nearly 7.5 lakh suggestions that we sifted through to bring out 3 reports. One, which was the first committee, the Committee for Evolution of National Education Policy, headed by a former cabinet secretary, late T.S.R. Subramaniam. Then a ministry exercise, draft inputs to the National Education Policy, purely an internal exercise in our ministry. And the third committee, which is the common committee, which is headed by our K. Kasturi Ranganji, and to which I was fortunate to be the secretary to. This exercise was a highly participative exercise. And we sifted through all that to come out with a 484-page draft report. And I will encourage each one of you, if not read that report in totality, at least read through the recommendations for school education, because what we distilled and wrote in the 66-page document is really having a lot of rationale that is explained in that committee's report. Because when we write a policy, even the 66 page is not read in its entirety. It's not read by many, even 4 years down the line. 29 July 2020, we approved the policy. Here on 15 June 2024, NEP is still the elephant in the room which we are trying to understand. So, having not read the policy, if we had not restricted it to 66 pages, we would still not have read it because we are all taken over by the size of that document. The National Curriculum Framework for School Education is as much in that range of about 480 odd pages, right? So we cannot avoid reading these. So let me talk about, we looked at education in one single organic continuum. I am sure all of us sitting here will accept that learning that happens even in the ages of 3 to 6 impacts my life skills as an adult. It impacts my capabilities for employment even as an adult. That can be linearly linked, organically linked, almost like an umbilical cord to the learnings you had in the early childhood care and education. So this is the reason why we looked at education in a one single organic continuum. It is another thing that for administrative functionality, we divide it at different levels of institutions, schools and colleges. In the government, there is a department for school education and a department for technical education, department for higher ed. That is all for administrative purposes. But look at it from the child's point of view. For the child, it is one learning journey. It is one trajectory. That child is not conscious that this is something that is held by Department of School and so on. For the child's learning journey and trajectory, it is in one single organic continuum. So there is a clear understanding that levels of learning are impacted by the previous and the after, and therefore we must understand the organic continuity of learning trajectories. And it is in that context that in school education, you all are all products of the 10 plus 2 plus 3. I come even before that, when we had the 11 years of schooling and the 2 years of pre-university and 2 years of degree. And now we are talking about a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. But the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 is not a physical restructuring of schools. The 11 and the 4 and the 10 plus 2 was a physical restructuring. Whereas the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, of 3 to 8 being foundational, 8 to 11 being preparatory, 11 to 14 being the middle stage, and 14 to 18 being the secondary stage, is not that any school which has from class 1 to 12, including the Balvatika, will have to split themselves into different segments. It is only the approach to curricula and pedagogy and the realization that learning happens in a developmentally appropriate, age-appropriate manner. So, when we talked about the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, the first 5 years from 3 to 8, we were conscious of the need for a robust early childhood care and education program. Why? Empirically, there is data which tells us, and we got this data from NIMHANS in Bangalore, which tells us that that beautiful grey matter in our hard skull, the brain, which is connected through neural networks for thinking, coordinating, many other things that the brain does, everything that we are capable of as human beings. That brain development and the neural networks connects in a child from conception to the age 6. 95% of the neural networks in our brain connect, not when we are 10-year-olds, not when we are 15-year-olds, but it connects 95% of those networks are already connected between the ages of 0 to 6. And what was our class 1 admission age? It was 5 years, by which time the neural networks should have been connected. And now we decided that let us start class 1 at age 6, by which time the child's neural networks are almost connected. Now, 0 to 6 is a very tender age. And as far as the government is concerned, we have a sister department called this Women and Child Development Department, the WCD department. It is they who handle the world's largest integrated child development scheme through a network of Anganwadis, whom you know over here as having Anganwadi workers and Asha workers. What does the Anganwadi do? It takes care of the health and nutrition of expectant mothers and newborn babies. And it runs the immunization and vaccination programs. As someone from the Planning Commission, let me tell you that India had the highest infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate prior to the coming in of the Integrated Child Development Scheme. The National Family Health Survey data will tell how many children are born in the womb of the mother before delivery and how many mothers die during delivery, and postnatal how many young born babies used to die. IMR and MMR are human development indicators. Thanks to the Integrated Child Development Scheme, we were able to prevent deaths that were happening in young babies and in expectant mothers, and also ensuring that they were having good calorific value of proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and so on, so that there was a healthy child and a healthy mother. Now, this was taken care of by the ICDS through a large network of Anganwadis, which had a third function, and that was education. Now, since the Anganwadi worker, we have 15 lakh Anganwadi workers. They were already overstressed with all these activities relating to health and nutrition of young babies prior to their birth and post their birth, and expectant mothers, prenatal and after their delivery. Therefore, education got sidelined. And therefore, what happened was, not you and I who are sitting here are the privileged elite lot of India. The bulk of India which lives in the villages, who depend on Anganwadis for health and nutrition, those children had to depend on Anganwadis for education also, but they were not getting any exposure at all. So as a consequence, what happened was that 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old neural networks never got developed. So when you come to class 1, there is a learning divide between a child who comes from a playway-based method of schooling, where already there has been a preparation to learn, and therefore the neural networks having got connected, and a child who does not come in with the neural networks getting connected. So for no fault of the child, when the child comes to class 1, you have a huge learning divide between those who came in from Anganwadis and those who do not come in from Anganwadis. And that is the need why we said that all schooling will incorporate an early childhood care and education. These Anganwadi workers also can be given 6 months for certification or 3 months certification, but let them also handle it. And we talked about a 4-pronged approach where preschools can be located near primary schools, Anganwadis can be located near primary schools, many strategies so as to ensure that all children in the age of 0 to 6 will be able to have some exposure to learning. 0 to 3 we cannot touch at all because they are very, very tender. And we are only starting with the 3-year-olds, so that between 3 to 6, maximum neural networks get connected, not through formal learning. It is not a downward imposition of your class 1, of learning ABCD and Kaka Gaga and Jack and Jill and whatever you are talking about, or 1, 2, 3 and so on. It was to be through playway-based method, joy-based method, activity-based learning, so that children perceive colors, shapes, understand connections between shapes and so on, coordinating abilities. Their so-called assimilative capabilities are nurtured through a robust playway-based method and not through a formal schooling method. What is currently happening is this huge mushrooming of preschools, play schools and so on are actually doing a disastrous thing, because they are killing the creativity of the child and not allowing them to grow in a natural manner with their natural spirit of curiosity. We never recommended in the policy that the class 1, whatever content is to be sort of learned, has to go down to ages 3, 4 and 5. Please understand that. And let me also tell you that the joy of learning we have successfully killed in our education system. We human beings are natural learners. Don't you see the pleasure of seeing the child taking the first step, the child speaking the first syllable, the child being curious about things around, and a mother saying, "Nee mindadirikkenke samayilla idu parayan." Right? If any one of us, let us look at ourselves as how much we have destroyed in our children. We do not realize that the child is seeing all this for the first time and is so curious about it. And that curiosity is not to be killed. That curiosity is to be encouraged, because it is from there that your 21st century skills are coming. And here you want 21st century skills, and in the schooling, in the early ages, as parents, we are, and then as teachers, don't ask questions. To question is wrong. That is where we have failed. That is where we have, as a lot of Indians, failed our children to bring out the creativities and their capabilities which each child has been born and blessed with. So, early childhood care and education is a joyful, playway-based method to initiate children into formal learning and enhance their assimilative capabilities through a variety of activities by which their sense of curiosity, their abilities to understand things around them are nurtured. So that first stage is the foundational stage. And why India sees the maximum dropouts in classes 1, 2 and 3 and so on? Assume I was taking this class in Chinese language. And I'm sure all of you would either be dozing off or wondering what is this that is being told. That is what is happening in our school classrooms. When that child whose neural networks are not connected is sitting in a class where nothing that that child is able to understand is happening, that child is bound to drop out. The only reason why India's dropout rates have reduced is not because of the child's love for learning, but because of hunger. India's child coming from the rural areas send their children to government schools because we have started a world's largest food program called the Midday Meal Scheme, which is now being called the PM Poshan Scheme, where one time we provide hot cooked meal to the child. And there are children who are sitting with a 24-hour cycle of hunger. And please understand, you and I are so blessed to have that food on our table, where our children will say, today I will not eat puri, I want a dosha, or I will not eat dosha, but I want an idli. Please understand, there are children in parts of India who dig through the mud to take out roots to eat that because there is no other food available. This is India. Please understand that. And therefore, why the dropout got reduced and why there was retention was because of that food that was being provided in the government schools. And it is the largest food program that India offers. And we in the policy went a step ahead, because in our data that we got, the cycle of hunger is 24 hours. After today's lunch, a large number of India's children eat only next day's lunch in the school. And it is not there if the school is closed. And that is why we said, add breakfast to the school. So we said, try and provide breakfast to the child also, so that that cycle of hunger is not as much as 24 hours. So the dropouts in class 1, 2 and 3, for two reasons that happen. One is they are learning, their neural networks are not connected, they don't understand it. So when ASA writes a report that a second standard child cannot, or a fifth standard child cannot do what a second standard basic counting is. So the gap we realized is the literacy and the numeracy. And that is why we talked in the policy of a mission mode foundational literacy and numeracy mission. And that is being called as the Nipun Bharat scheme, which is the national initiative for proficiency that we are talking about in children. So Nipun Bharat may not apply to schools like yours, but you all must understand that it is basic numerical counting abilities, what we used to say reading, writing and arithmetic. The reading abilities, the writing abilities and the numerical abilities. And that should be happening during the foundational stage, so that children cover the ages 3 to 8 and are able to come out into the preparatory stage. The preparatory is the introduction to formal learning, and the 11th, age 11, that is the middle stage which Dr. Manoranjani has talked about. All the changes in the school curricula that we are talking about is actually happening in class 6. 6 to 8 is the crucial stage where all these changes are taking place. And what are those changes? When you studied, you will remember, and even now, the students you taught till maybe 2 years back, that in subjects we say there are curricular subjects, co-curricular subjects and extracurricular subjects. I am good at playing cricket or hockey or football, it is extracurricular. I am good at poetry or drawing or environment, it is seen as co-curricular. And curricular is only maths, science, social sciences, languages, etc. And we started believing that it is only the curricular that contributes to individual development, without realizing that last pillar of learning, the learning to be, which says that someone may not be good at any of this, but is good at sports, is good at music, is good at dancing, and therefore that talent should also be nourished. So should we not be able to encourage that? What is it? Optimize the talent and the potential that resides in each one of the students. So all the changes that we are bringing about is happening in the middle stage. No hard separations between curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. All subjects carry equal weightage, and we will change the pedagogy from testing what we have been universally testing till date, and that is memory, to go to testing their competencies of analytical skills, problem solving, scientific temper, cognitive skills and so on. So the approach to pedagogy has to change to use what was mentioned over here to create active learning through interaction. And your slide that Dr. Manoranjani has said saves me a lot of work, has a number of strategies that can be deployed to create active learning in the classes. Now, when you create active learning and give children activities to make a chart, to come and make a presentation, here we are again having a cultural problem. The mother and the father say, in the homework for tomorrow, and there is something to be prepared. നമ്മൾ ചാർട്ട് പേപ്പറൊക്കെ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് നമ്മൾ ചെന്ന് ഇത് തയ്യാറാക്കിയിട്ട് നാളെ മോള് ക്ലാസ്സിൽ കൊണ്ടുപോയാൽ മതി. What have you done? You are actually ruining the child's independent ability and believing that you have done good to the child without realizing you have done great harm to the child. Allow that child to do it. Don't be bothered if Robin in your neighbor has got more marks than maybe Ajit in your own home. Don't make children artificially compare themselves and create this kind of hierarchy and condemn them, saying that nee enda itre mark kondu varate matton itre mark kondu. We are doing great injustice to the capabilities. Look back in hindsight to your own career and your own schooling, and what really matters. Does it matter today? Did it matter that you scored more or less than your neighbors or your cousin in today's world? It didn't matter. Then why are we doing it? Why are we making history repeat itself in a condemning manner? So let us learn that NEP is giving you an opportunity to recognize that 60 children in your class, some will like maths, some will like science, some will like language, some will like history, someone likes music, someone likes dancing, someone likes hockey, someone likes cricket. Allow all of that. Let 100 flowers bloom. Not make all of them the same color and the same size and say that no, you are condemned to perish because you are not good at maths or you are not good at science or you are not good at languages. Allow children to flower with their potential and their capability. It is for you as a teacher to perceive and bring that out. So you must not look at, if I had the time, I would have asked each one of you your name and the discipline and the school you are attached to. You must know your children. You must know the child in your class. You are not dealing with an inanimate object. You are dealing with a living child, having a background at home, having many other identities that the child has, and you must be able to make that child feel wanted and desired. And you can bring out that not by just going into a class and giving a talk and walking out. Put them into quizzes, put them into presentation, role plays, activities. That way you come to know that. And as she rightly said, or Sunita mentioned, I think, when you give them a group activity, some who are born with leadership, take up the leadership. Others come together, and when they choose the group, please understand the good, the better, and the average, and the below average come together. And there is a leveling process that happens, and a natural mentoring that takes place. So you don't decide it. You allow the child, because you're dealing with someone from class 6 onwards. That child of a class 6 today is not the class 6 student that we were. They are very independent. So allow them, and then you will find two good students will not come together because that competition is there in them. So the good will take up in one and then take up less average and take up below average, so that that child can show that they have performed well. That is where that individualization also comes in. Group collaboration also comes in. He talked about collaborative skills. 21st century is all about collaboration. Individual collaboration at student level, collaboration by teachers, collaboration by departments, collaboration by institutions. Collaborative learning is the key to 21st century, and instead of giving individual activities, always encourage group activities. And when you make about these shifts, that assessment also, so you all prepare lesson plans, right? I'm sure if you all are all having a B.Ed background, you all prepare a lesson plan. What is your duration of a period in a school? I am more cognizant in higher education. 40 minutes. So 40-minute class, I'm going to teach them, let us say, what is society or the study of society. That 40 minutes, you must be very clear, what is the outcome that I want? Outcome in terms of understanding and knowledge, skills and competency. And I say that I will talk for 20 minutes in your lesson plan. You're not telling it to the child or the student. Your talk is going to be 20 minutes, but you're going to give 20 minutes of activities. And you tell them in advance that tomorrow this is what we are going to talk about, this is what is there in your textbook, but these are other things that you can read, resources that you can take from the internet, these are other newspaper items. Tell them all that, all the resources. Let them read whatever they want, and then ask a few of them to start presenting. And over here, let me also tell you that the language should not matter. We have for the first time said that we need not restrict it to English language. And even if your medium of instruction is an English medium school, let us not make this grave error that English is equivalent to intelligence. Let us not make that assumption. If they can say it in Malayalam or Hindi or Sanskrit, let them say it. If you are not able to understand that language, get another child who has understood that to interpret it for us. So what happens is, you allow children to express in the language that they are most familiar. If you are limited by your handicap of not knowing, use another child who is able to tell us what that child has told. So that child also doesn't feel diffident that I cannot say in English, therefore I cannot speak at all. Let us remove that notion. So when you put this in your lesson plan, you also link it to what is your assessment that you're doing. What are you assessing that child's capability in? In understanding it, or in having a skill to communicate it, or you put an analytical question and the child has analyzed it. So this is the way, and when you finally assess, we are saying we move towards competency-based assessment, where questions need not be lifted directly from the content that is there in the textbook. And this, please make it aware to another stumbling block, which is the huge force of parents. So in your parent-teacher meetings, sensitize parents. Because the parent says, if you don't give the child homework, no homework, teacher in the class, homework, because the parent is sort of relieved when the child is doing the homework. The parent is also trying to abdicate the responsibility. Whereas, when you are telling the parent that this is how 21st century learning is, you tell them that you go and collect data. She said about herbal education. In the surrounding vicinity or in your own garden, whether you have lemongrass, whether you have ginger. I often tell, because I have had education in Bombay, my friends whose grandchildren study in schools, if they are asked where that apple comes from, the child will tell you from Reliance Fresh store. And it is not surprising. The child doesn't know that the apple grows on an apple tree, and the farmer is cultivating that in a certain season with a certain type of a soil and preventing it from pesticides and so on, pests and so on. The labor of the food on the table that comes from the farmer is not understood, because they think anything can be bought by money. Change that perception. Change that perception in the child. So when you are preparing a lesson plan, be conscious of these things and relate it to the assessment. And questions should not be only from the book, and parents should be sensitized that this is the way in which we will be teaching, because this is necessary in today's context. So don't be subdued by parental pressure. Rather, sensitize them, do advocacy, make them also aware. And fortunately, in the schools in the southern part of India, we have very strong parent-teacher associations. And I think, therefore, we should leverage that strength to really meet these requirements. And therefore, the assessment, when we are saying, and CBSE says, that they will introduce the open book examination in classes 10 and 12. We can say it with confidence, because that question will not find the answer in the textbook. The question cannot be committed to memory and answered. The question will have the child to look at the data, analyze it, Look at problem solving, look at scientific temper, look at many things that we are calling are the 21st century skills. And the only plea that I am making to you, because you all are all English medium schools, we have said, as far as multilingualism is concerned, that in early schooling we should encourage mother tongue education, home language or local language. The Indian Constitution in the 8th schedule is talking about 22 languages. India is home to 200 languages. And India has 1,680 dialects. Can you imagine how ignorant we are in terms of our language abilities? And we think that we can only learn in English language. So the entire Western world, the entire European world, and a bulk of the Asian countries where only 1 or 2 or 3 languages are spoken, are awed and amazed at the linguistic diversity that India has. And we are not ourselves mindful and cognizant of that. So when I talked about empirical evidence, I am talking about the empirical evidence which also tells us that children learn best in their early years in the language that they are most familiar with, which is usually the mother tongue. Because the child is umbilically connected to the mother. It is the umbilical cord that disconnects the child and the mother, right? So it is that language and that mother tongue that the child perceives the best. Now, going further, we therefore said it can be home language or it can be local language. The greatest challenge in implementing this is the absence of teachers and the need to do mapping. Because even in a state like Kerala, how Malayalam is spoken maybe in Kasargod will be quite different from the Malayalam that is spoken in Trivandrum. And therefore, there are nuances in that language that vary. Therefore, the mapping that needs to be done. Similarly, if you go to Karnataka, some parts speak Tulu, some parts speak Kannada, some parts speak Urdu, some parts speak Telugu, even some parts speak Marathi. So, the local language mapping has to be done and the availability of the teachers have to be seen. Now, while that is an issue there, I am only trying to tell you that in your class, even if yours is an English medium school, and you want to teach them communicative abilities in English and you insist that they should learn English speaking skills, let it be so. But let us initially allow a child, when wanting to express, not saying or not ridiculing or allowing other children to mock that child because of the inability to express it in English. You allow that child initially and then encourage that child that, okay, next time you will use a few of these English terms. Gradually, the child's capabilities will be built up. I am not saying that that child should continue to only use their own local language. I am only saying that confidence should be built in that child. Other children should empathize with that child, respect that child, and not allow that child to be mocked or ridiculed in the class. So, this changes that we are bringing. We also brought about the 10 days bagless between classes 6 to 8 to intern our students with local craftsmen and local anything that is local artisans and so on. So that you remember when I talked about the 4 pillars of learning, we also need to look at how Gandhiji perceived it. It is the head, the heart and the hand. How many children play with earth today? You will say, Mone kai alkai po mannaitu ideda germs keri verum matte. Learning with the earth, you respect Mother Earth. You nurture that and you don't realize that the potter is working with a lump of clay to shape that beautiful creation that comes. The farmer is working with something to bring out that beautiful fruit or flower and so on. The craftsman who is dealing with brassware, the craftsman who is dealing with wood. These are all crafts, and we must make our children sensitive and aware of it. So 10 days bagless between classes 6 to 8, and if you are not doing it, start incorporating it, where no textbooks and books will be brought or carried. There is no bag. That is why we call it bagless. No school bag, but the child will be interning with artisans. So you will have to work out wherever your school is, what is the local artisans available, make them aware. You can take them to a farm, you can take them somewhere. So this is a part of that education. And you must tell parents that this is also a learning that you're giving to the child. And also, as I said, the assessment will change. Coming to the 9 to 12 is where we are bringing about major changes. Let me not again ask you this discomforting question, how many of you have read through the NCFSC, but please read through that. And we are talking about 8 curricular areas which children must learn in classes 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. Mathematics education, science education, social science education, language education, art education, vocational education, interdisciplinary areas, health and wellness. All children in classes 9 and 10 will have a combination of these 8 subjects, and the same in 9 and 12. But some of these will not have external exams, will not even have exams, it will only be an activity. So that you don't have to worry about how much of load the student has. It is only that you're sensitizing that child. And if you read through the NCF, because I am constrained by time, you will have a number of activities which tell you, which are examining vocational part of it. Interdisciplinary includes environment, gender, and so on. These things the child must be conscious about. So all these 8 areas are there in class 10 and in class 12 in a combination of groupings. And we are also telling you what can get covered within that. And in some of them, there is no end term exams. Now, for improving the quality of schooling, we are talking about a school quality assessment and accreditation framework. And this is a quality assurance not being done externally, but being done internally, where you are assessing yourself on 10 parameters in which weightage has been assigned, the largest weightage being given to curriculum, but that is around 40%. The remaining in infrastructure, teaching resources, perception, student support, 10-10 each. You make out your own self-assessment, and later on, if at a national level we go in for school accreditation, just like we do it for colleges and universities, schools will also get accredited. And of course, you know, in accreditation, we are not saying give grading, because we are only saying schools may be accredited or not accredited. But right now, it is a self-accreditation and a self-assessment. Please look at the SQAF. I don't know, you must be at least visiting the CBSE websites. Yes. So go through that and do your self-assessment. I don't want hands to be raised because I don't want to sound, let us say, higher than you because I'm standing 2 feet above you. I put myself at the same level as you, but please look through the CBSE website. Now we are also talking about what we called in the policy census examinations in class 3, 5 and 8, which is now coming out through what we call SUFFLE. And that is basically to analyze the learning capabilities and not to pass or fail. It is only for an assessment of learning that our students have and find out gray areas for them to improve. And the latest that has come in is the National Credit Framework, which is talking about 40 hours per year, and which is notionally saying that if one credit is 30 hours, every year a child notionally puts in about 1200 hours, which includes academic coursework, skill-based experience, activities, many other things that contribute to the holistic development. So these changes are coming about, and we are also talking, as I said, about collaboration. So the CBSE website will also talk to you about hubs of learning. And you must, as schools, start collaborating with other schools, and I'm not talking of schools within the same Amrita family, but schools in a given geographical vicinity. You must start collaborating with other schools. I do not know the landscape of every school in this area, but beyond your own fraternity of schools, if you have other CBSE affiliated schools, and it has to be the same board because you follow a similar pattern, but it can be from different managements, but you need to start collaborating for sharing of resources, for broadening the scope and understanding, for teachers to start learning from one another, and doing a kind of a hand-holding among institutions. So, in school education, the thrust has been on instilling also this idea of holistic development. So, someone asked me this very rudimentary question of what is the difference between all-round development and holistic development. All that I could say is that holistic is a very integrative approach. In the sense you are looking at not just the intellectual, academic, the cognitive, but also the social, emotional, or rather socio-emotional, mental well-being, physical health and fitness, spirituality, artistry, aesthetics, so many things that go to the making of an individual. And it is equally important in today's world to look at two aspects. So on inclusion, we wrote about the children with learning disabilities and children with physical disabilities. And by nature, we are not inclusive by nature. We are not inclusive by nature. My child is not handicapped. Using the word handicapped is also today not appreciated. My child is not, therefore I am not sensitive to that. Long back, maybe about 6 months back, there was this beautiful WhatsApp forward that I received. It was an advertisement from some, I think, health drink. A child who's physically handicapped, whose legs uses crutches, when there is a sports competition, insists that he wants to participate in the running race. And the teacher says, no, you can't because others are well-bodied children. His mother is also very upset. But other children are not at all concerned. They think that if he has to participate, let him participate. And so the running competition starts with all other participants being able-bodied children and this child in crutches running in a running race competition. And all the able-bodied children take off and they really run up to, let's say, 75% of their track. And then they all stop. And then they wait for this child to come to them, and then they don't run, they allow this child to reach the finishing line. They're trying to say that you allow the other child also to be able to participate. That spirit we should, as parents, as teachers, because we double up as parents, don't forget that. We don't have two standards as a parent and as a teacher. We double up as parents and teachers, to be conscious that maybe in this life you got an able-bodied child. And I think all of us might believe in an afterlife and a rebirth. We are not sure whether we ourselves would be able-bodied in the next life. So let us not have the arrogance of being able-bodied and in good health, but also be empathetic and not pity and not sympathize, but be empathetic to children. Another anecdote that I can give you, when I started my teaching career in Patkar College in Bombay, and we had a register for staff to mark their attendance when we come in and we leave. So when coming in, usually nobody is there. When leaving, I signed and it had swing doors, right? Normally you have cabins like that. So as I opened the swing door, I saw the student with crutches right from here coming in. And I kept that swing door open. And that student said, don't insult me, madam. We tend to think that we should pity those who are not as able-bodied as us. But they have a dignity, and they have a self-esteem. And let us learn to respect that. So in inclusion, we wrote about inclusive strategies for the SCs, the STs, the OBCs, the linguistic and religious minorities, the urban poor, those living in geographically inaccessible areas, the children from migrant labor, vulnerable sections, including children with disabilities. We used an omnibus term to call it the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. And we are talking about schools being sensitive to it by creating gender inclusion funds, social inclusion funds, giving scholarships and free ships, providing access devices. For us, tokenism is there is a ramp. Once there is a ramp, everything is done for the differently abled. It goes beyond that. Use special educators, take the services of the Rehabilitation Council, and use technology as a great enabler that brings children together. And today you should also be looking at another aspect, and that is the mental health and well-being of students. Children today, thanks to that beautiful gadget, the mobile, the parent wants the child out of their head for eating. And so the child looks at it, and the child is glued on and on and on into that gadget. And as a consequence, the child does not share any grievances with the parent. Parents seem to be running some rat race. Brothers also are running some rat race. Sisters also run. So there is no one to whom they can come back and share their emotional troubles. And they are highly stressed from within. And what therefore happens is, lot of neurodivergent children, depression, bipolar disorders, anger management, obsessive behavior, all this is manifesting itself. And as teachers, therefore, we must be very conscious to observe our children and observe behavioral disorders. So mental health and well-being is a major concern that we are looking at. Which brings me to the last point that I will stop with, and that is on the importance of language in education. And I'm not talking about the medium of instruction. Language is the unifying force which makes us understand culture, which makes us understand arts, which makes us understand literature, and it has a much elevating experience when you understand all this. So Kerala is home to Kathakali and Mohiniyattam. These are all reflecting some stories. These can be mythological, this can be otherwise. But these, to know that when it is being performed, whether it is in Sanskrit or in Malayalam, the child should understand that. So the importance of understanding language in its linkages to art forms, which make children more artistic and aesthetic and cultivate right social and moral values, comes about, and therefore technology's overriding influence gets reduced when you encourage them to read, to perform, to appreciate art forms. Therefore, the linkage of language to understanding art forms. And here in Kerala, we have a lot of youth festivals. So schools do encourage that. And it is good in a certain sense because it cultivates a sense of competitiveness also. Competition is not a bad word. It is only when the game is not played by the rules of the game that it becomes unfair. So that has to be encouraged and make children understand that when you learn Hindi or when you learn Malayalam or when you learn Sanskrit or when you learn any language for that matter, what is it helping you in terms of understanding and reading things of art forms, of many other artistic formations, including representative, taking them to a museum, taking them to a library, taking them to an art gallery, taking them to these places. Either you can do it or you can tell the child to go and see it and come back and share experiences. Sharing of experiences of this kind helps to bring about that holistic development. So all that I've tried to sensitize all of you in this monologue of about 1.5 hours is to tell you that these changes that we are bringing about, where we as teachers must remember what Alvin Toffler has said in his book, The Future Shock. where he describes that an illiterate of the 21st century is not one who cannot read or write, but is one who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So let us be open-minded about learning new things, unlearning certain things which we are forced to unlearn because we are living in an age of that kind, and relearn new things because that is what it calls for. So let us also learn from a 3-year-old who is given a smartphone in the hand, will effortlessly navigate through all the menu, while you gingerly look at the menu and not understand it. So understand that, I don't know whether Kavita heard me in the last time, we are here where we are able to pass on to our children, not because of the arrogance of any kind, but because God gave us birth 40 years before them. And that is the only reason. So let us have the bubble burst that you are the know-all, you are only the know-more because you were born 40 years ahead of the child whom you are teaching. So let us not carry with us any arrogance. Let us have the humility that that child is also worth the respect and the self-esteem. And you are only someone who by a certain fortitude of fate is there to guide and take them along and walk them along and lead them also, but never think that you are having more values, you are more knowledgeable, and all those things which we wear on our sleeves and move around with a halo around our head. Let's not do that. So I urge each one of us as teachers and as parents to be simple, humane, and people with humility and not with arrogance. Learning cannot happen in an arrogance environment. It always happens in a sharing environment. Thank you very much.
Shed some light on open textbook that is going to be implemented for 9th and 1st one for the coming year.
So open book exams are something that we want teachers also to sort of learn. Currently what we are doing in our examination is that we ask questions like explain, describe, terms which has answers reflected directly in the text material. So by nature what happens is children tend to start memorizing it. When they memorize it, there is no real assimilation that is happening. Whereas when we start asking questions, and there is a whole lot of material, if I may say, to you, available in the NCF curriculum, which gives you examples of how open book questions have to be formulated. They cannot be words which automatically forces a child to sort of regurgitate or vomit out what that child has committed to memory. You ask them to analyze something. You give them 2 situations and then ask them to arrive at a conclusion based on those 2 situations. Or even if it is in mathematics, you show 2 methods and then you say that this is how that answer is. How did you arrive at that answer? So people start using methods where they independently start thinking. So when we use open book, all kinds of question items, how to prepare question items for open book, there is a lot of literature that is there available in the NCF. For each subject, there are examples being given to you, and you must go through that. But the conventional thing is not to use questions which says describe, differentiate, explain. These terms, obviously the content is already there, and therefore the child automatically reproduces that without actually analyzing. So you can actually, we are saying, you give the child the book. The child can sit with the textbook and can also have the question paper. But we know, as those who prepared the questions, that even if the child skims through that entire book, that child is not going to get that answer. And that question has been asked in a manner which is provoking that child's independent thinking, problem solving, and analytical thinking. That is the idea of an open book exam. And we have not yet really reached that level of maturity because we've been so much used to the spoon feeding that children have been used to memorization, and it calls for a major shift to really go in for an open book exam.
Actually, I have a doubt regarding the assessment and evaluation. The assessment part, the things that we have to go through the child that he is achieving or mostly achieved, or is that concept we have to go through?
No, so basically evaluating is where you're finally saying that a student has scored to pass or fail, and then you're grading them out. But assessing is, we talk about 3 forms of assessment: of learning, for learning, and so on. Basically, you want to know how much that student has understood something, and therefore it is more of a formative way, which is summative is the one that you do for the evaluation part. But while you are teaching and you are transacting in your yearly calendar, you are actually assessing a learner's performance. So I didn't touch upon it, but the holistic progress card, we are talking about self-assessment, peer assessment, parental assessment, and then the school assessment. So that assessment is where the child is making one's own assessment, whether I'm good at writing something, or whether I'm good at explaining something, or whether I'm good at communicating something, or whether I'm good at analyzing a certain data, or I'm having a scientific temper, whether I'm good at collaborating. These kind of skills, along with the curricular content, how much of it I have understood. Because only when you have understood certain content or knowledge is a prerequisite to the other understanding. So I cannot understand a more complex thing unless I have understood the basic. These are to be assessed. These are not to be evaluated. When you are evaluating, there is finally a quantitative value judgment that the student is capable of passing or failing. That is the broadest one. Or you are grading them to become grade A and B and so on, kind of a thing. But assessing is, as you go along, it's a feedback for the learner, for the parent, for you as a teacher, so that there is a progression in the learner's understanding, knowledge, skills, and competencies. So assessment is a step that helps you in the final evaluation, but assessment is more of a matrix to help learners improve themselves, find out which is their weak areas, and you as a teacher also helping in that. So when you tell, for example, to a parent in a PTA meeting, and you call them on a one-to-one basis, that your child knows the content, but is not able to present it, that is where there seems to be a gap. And therefore, how can that gap be bridged is where you are trying to assess that learner's performance. Whether it is communication or whether it is actually writing it out. Some children, for example, get stressed out when they are asked to perform, when they know that they are going to be assessed. Whereas in another situation, the same thing. I used to be called a Hitler in my college days, and my mother, who was a school principal, was also a Hitler, because exam that I gave, my late mother, and I'm here because of her and my father, no doubt about that, an exam that I gave for 3 hours. I went back, had a cup of tea and some snacks, and I write that 3 hours paper again. And then the marks are arrived at. And then if there is a variation, she used to come to the school. So that is how she was called a Hitler among all the mothers. But that is not how, I may have learned by that. But today you can't expect. The child will say, I have to write that 3-hour paper again. There is no way that I'm going to do that. So the need to assess is to understand the weaknesses and help that learner to achieve a better score. So that is also in terms of all the higher order skills. Analysis, the logical thinking, scientific temper. So when I said in your lesson plan, you deal with the assessment also. You also have to break down whether you're looking at logical thinking or whether you're looking at, so in logical thinking, another anecdote, we studied logic. We had Professor Bansali, who was one of the best teachers of logic in Mithibai College, and he had asked us to give an example of deductive reasoning. And one of the students was a very famous tabla player today, Dhruvajyoti Ghosh. He said, love is blind and God is love. So what does it deduce? God is blind. And Bansali shouted at him and said, you can't arrive that. But he said, logically it is a right statement. So put children to start thinking. So when you do your assessment in your lesson plan, whether I am going to test logical thinking, whether I am going to test communicative ability, whether I am going to test collaborative ability, whether I am testing problem solving, these things are what you are assessing in a learner's performance. And your final examination is your evaluation.
Thank you. And once again, actually, how can we record it, the assessment part, when we communicate with the parents? Suppose one concept, the student is maybe he's achieving now, or mostly achieved, or maybe fully achieved. So the achieving part, again, we have to assess, right?
Yes. I mean, you look at the holistic progress card, it is giving you a matrix. And many of the schools, even prior to NEP, were using it for a number of parameters that we were looking at. You can either do it in a grading manner, or you can do it as, yes, I mean, this much and this much as a cutoff kind of a thing. But you must be conscious that you are looking at a complete card from your class 1, not below that, from class 1. And we are saying in the NCF, no exams for class 1 and class 2 also. So class 1 onwards to your class 12, you are looking at a holistic progress card. So you are actually going to see the other teacher when taking in, let us say, a 7th standard student and wants to really do their job very well, should be looking at the holistic progress card of the students, what they did up to class 6. Then they already know what are their gray areas and what each student is good at. So in every student, you will have a complete book, which is like the holistic. It's not that 1 year it is there and you forget about it. That is how you actually assess them over a period of time.
Now, sir, ma'am, it would be good if you can say something about 3-language policy.
Okay. Are you a politician by any chance?
No, definitely not, ma'am. Because up to 9, from 9 we have a 2-language policy now.
Okay.
So parents are having concern now.
Okay. No, so if you are saying the 3-language policy, that is a politician's question. But if you are talking about the language, the approach to languages, see, a UNESCO study tells us that empirically there is data that the more languages children learn, it enhances their cognitive abilities. Now, because we have introduced 8 curricular areas, if we continue to give students to learn possibly 3 languages, I'm only telling you the pragmatic reason why we did that. We thought that that would add to the load because by nature, learning languages involves a lot of real learning kind of a thing, which you cannot do it only through activities. So only because we are accommodating the remaining 6 areas of maths education and science education, social science, and then giving them that groupings of vocational and so on. The idea was that languages, if children want to do over and above, which is what we wrote in the credit framework, that if children want to learn more than that, they are free to do that subject to their own abilities and capability. So the school can continue to offer that, but we do not include it within that entire options of courses that we give it to the students. But the reason why we basically have talked that children should be encouraged to learn more languages, and why the NCF was finally forced to restrict it to the only 2 language options that we are talking about, is because of the fact that earlier they did not, a math student may have learned maths and science and maybe only languages, whereas today every child is learning social sciences also, languages also, mathematics education also, the whole thing of arts education, vocational education, health and wellness, vocational and interdisciplinary areas of environment, gender and so on. So we didn't want to have that overload, but if the school has more languages available and the student wants to go beyond and acquire that, the student can be offered that, subject to, of course, your own practical considerations of your timetable framing and number of students who want to take it and so on. So I don't think you asked me about the policy. That's why I did not talk about the 3-language policy.
Up to 8th standard, they have 3 languages. Then 9th and of course they don't. So parents are having concern why again it's such a burden with 3 languages in 9th standard. So I just want to clear.
No, so you should be able to tell them that learning languages, as many languages can be encouraged, but to stick to a certain curriculum load, we may have to take certain pragmatic decisions. And still, if children are very keen on learning it and the parent is also very keen and the teacher is also available and the classroom is also there, or even a small space that can be made available, there should be nothing that should stop the child from doing. But we are so regimented because children come in at one time and children leave at one time. Teachers also come in at one time and teachers also leave at one time. So I don't think that regimentation has gone, even though there is a lot of flexibility that we have otherwise brought. But it is free to you all to really think of it. If you think that there are, let's say you are offering English and you are having Hindi, and children want to learn Sanskrit or they want to learn Malayalam or any other language, because today Kerala is home to many other language groups who are now staying over here. So Bengali is a beautiful language. In Bengali, the standard joke is you will not know whether a husband and wife are fighting because the language is so sweet, you do not know that. Whereas if it is in Malayalam or Tamil, you will know that, no, there is Bhayangara Vazhakku nadandondirikku avade. Whereas Bengali is a very sweet language, so you don't even realize that there is a severe heated exchange happening because of the sweetness of that language. So today we are home to having people who come speaking Bengali, Assamese and so many other languages. So I think it's left to the parent, but you must make them understand it is not that we are taking a shortcut. We recognize the importance of languages, and language learning can be taken up by parents even otherwise, not just Indian languages, but learning many other languages. It can be German, it can be Chinese, it can be Japanese, whatever the child wants. There are a lot of language institutions, but not the private ones, the actual cultural centers like the Max Muller Cultural Center or the Alliance Française. These are the centers where they don't really fleece the parents and you are having it at a reasonable cost. And you can even take it up online. Let us be clear about that. Today you don't have to really go to an academy to do that. You can learn languages online. Hunger pants? Okay. Yeah, so I think it's been a pleasure to know all of you. I didn't have the time to ask each one of you for your name, but in whatever role that you all are doing, please do it well with compassion and dedication, and stay blessed and take care. Thank you very much.